I'm here with one of the most plugged-in men in the gold industry. When I say plugged in, I'm talking about physical gold. So that's refining, shipping, storage, vaulting, who's buying, who's selling. As I say, one of the most knowledgeable individuals in the world of the physical gold industry. In order to get this on camera and do this interview, we've had to agree to a couple of conditions. This individual is going to confirm my investigation into the great gold hoax and expand on it a little bit, get us some information we can't get anywhere else. We've had to agree to a couple of conditions. One, obviously, we won't reveal his identity or his exact affiliation. The other is we had to meet in a remote location where we could speak in total privacy. My first question is, are you able to reveal to our viewers what you've told me privately about the dire state of the gold market today?
Sure. What we know, Jim, is that gold moving through Switzerland is where essentially the core of the industry is. These refineries here in Switzerland process a substantial amount of the world's gold. And the heads of these refineries have good visibility into where the gold's coming from, where the gold's going, who the buyers are, who the sellers are. And that gives us a very good idea of what's happening. And what's been happening is that the supply pipeline for raw gold that can be refined and turned into other fabricated products has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So today we're facing a situation where sometimes refineries are actually unable to source gold. They're having to do whatever they can essentially to find new sources of gold.
So what proof do you have of this actual supply dynamic? I assume you talk to other insiders like yourself.
Yeah, essentially my proof is just my own personal experience talking to different people in our industry.
Right.
So, for example, if I do talk to some of these refinery heads and they have a pretty good visibility into where it's coming from, where it's going, and whether they can actually source metal or not, it gives us a pretty good idea as to whether they're able to get the metal or whether they're having problems getting the metal.
How does this compare to prior episodes in the gold industry? Is this worse or better than some other times that people remember?
This is probably the tightest time for the last 30 plus years.
So the tightest supply situation in 30 years, that's what you're hearing, that's what you're saying?
That's correct.
Wow. Well, given this imbalance, given this tightness of supply, why is the price of gold not a lot higher? Normal economic supply-demand, when there's a lot of demand and not much supply, the price goes up. Why is the price not going up a lot more?
Well, part of that reason is that the West has been selling a lot. So as the West sells, that metal then moves over to the East. But I think the primary reason is that the price of gold is set in what we call the paper markets and not the physical markets. And that's the reason.
So there's activity in the paper markets where you can sell 10,000 tons of gold on paper. You don't need any actual gold to back up that trade. You just need a little bit of margin money. But you can dump all the gold in the world on a paper basis, even though it's not real gold, and use that to keep the price down.
Yeah, sure, that's a possibility, and that essentially has happened and continues to happen.
Well, what's going to happen when this paper gold hoax, as I call it, is exposed, when a wider audience, when people realize what's actually going on? What's going to happen to the price of gold and physical gold?
I think several things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is that if people think or they believe that there's any kind of shortage or the gold price starts to move drastically, price action creates market action. People are going to start buying. When people start buying, the first thing that's going to happen is that the retail outlets will probably be cleaned out. Once the retail outlets are cleaned out, if there's enough demand, there's going to be this time lag between when they can get more gold in to produce and to fabricate into smaller bars and smaller coins. If the demand is strong enough, that's going to start affecting the wholesale market. And if it starts affecting the wholesale market, then I think you're going to have substantial price actions in order to clear that.
You've given us a good idea of the dynamics of how the price of gold will skyrocket when this kind of hoax is exposed, but how much longer can it go on?
Well, it can't go on forever, and any number of things could cause this to change the situation very rapidly. These things could be anything from all of the major regions lining up together and all purchasing at the same time. So, for example, right now in 2016, the West has started buying quite a bit, but China has backed off a little bit, and so has India. And historically speaking, for the last 3 years, and what's caused this major shortage for the most part is that the demand out of China has been absolutely huge. It's been nothing like it has happened before, as far as I know. And what's happening is that the West has sold off a lot of its inventory. All of that gold's come out of places like London and other areas, gone through Switzerland, got melted into 1 kilo bars and sent over to China, and a lot of it's been sent over to India. But since 2016, with the West buying again, China's backed off a little bit, India's backed off a little bit. If all three of these regions start buying at the same time, this is the kind of thing that can exacerbate this supply shortage to the point where it starts triggering sort of runs on the price and could cause huge spikes in the price if necessary in order to clear the market.
It's one thing when the West is selling and the East is buying, but if the West and the East are both buying, then you're saying it's just a matter of time before the price spikes.
Yes, absolutely, because the question becomes, where does the gold come from?
Right.
In the last few years, with the West selling off, all of that gold has essentially moved through Switzerland to the East. Well, the big question becomes, is the East ever going to sell what they've got? And I think the answer to that is probably not. So if the West starts buying in substantial quantity and the East picks up again in substantial quantity, at that point the question really becomes, well, where does that gold come from?
So you're saying this paper gold default, this breakdown, the super spike in prices, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Absolutely. It's only a matter of time because this kind of thing cannot go on forever. The current situations that as they are right now can't continue forever. There's no way that the tightness that's currently existing in the market can go on. If all of these demand factors line up together like I think they might, at that point then definitely we'll want to see some changes.
Now, there are a lot of people who think they own gold, but they're going to find out the hard way that they don't actually own gold. They've got some kind of paper contract or claim, but when push comes to shove, the gold is not going to be available to fulfill that. Can you tell us what kinds of investments are these? What kinds of claims do people have where they think they own gold, but they don't really?
Well, there are a number of investments in the gold space, so to speak, where people can just trade it because they're trying to get price exposure. These types of investments are things like COMEX futures. They might be OTC forwards, things like this, or perhaps unallocated positions with a bullion bank. What that means is you have an account with a bank, and the bank owes you gold. You're essentially an unsecured creditor. So there are many types of situations like that where if there is ever some kind of major panic buying gold, if there were ever failures to deliver, COMEX, for example, what they can do is they can just, it's in the fine print in the contract, they can just close out your contract with cash. You don't actually get the gold. For example, other examples might include ETFs. Some of these ETFs, if you read the prospectus, it's difficult to know whether they really have the gold. They're written in a way where there's loopholes there that they might not even know whether they have the gold or not. And so these are all situations that an investor probably wants to pay close attention to.
So should investors wait until this gold hoax is exposed to take action, or should they do something immediately?
If someone were to wait, the price might run away from them and they might regret it later.
Could it be worse than that? I mean, the price running away and being able to maybe get some gold at a much higher level, you've lost out on that investment game. But could it be worse than that, where you might not be able to get the gold at all?
That's certainly a possibility. Like I said, once the retail outlets are cleaned out and once that retail pipeline is cleaned out, at that point you're dealing with the wholesale. And I think what will end up happening is that certain players within the industry who have access to the wholesale might be able to get it, but it might be more difficult for anybody else to get it. So smaller buyers, retail buyers, unless you're buying millions perhaps, you might not be able to get your hands on it. And the price is just going to continue to run away from you until the market clears.
What I've heard referred to as a buying panic.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you say that most people own the right form of gold or the wrong form of gold?
I would say they own the wrong form of gold. Most people are owning types of gold investments that aren't gold at all.